Welcome to Scoli Sleep Stories. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable. Let the day soften around you and settle in for a calm documentary made for curious minds. If these stories help you rest, learn, or simply enjoy a quieter part of the day, please consider liking this episode and subscribing to the channel. Now, when you are ready, let us begin. Chapter 1: A Land Among the Seas. Imagine for a little while that you are standing at the edge of a quiet shore in southern Europe, where a long peninsula reaches down toward the sea. The water before you is calm and pale in the early light. Rounded pebbles rest beneath the shallows, and the air carries the faint scent of pine and aromatic shrubs warmed by the sun. This is Greece, a land of mountains, islands, valleys, and deeply indented coasts. It is here, beside the measured sound of water against a harbor wall, that our slow journey through many centuries begins. The name Greece can carry several meanings. It can refer to the modern Greek state. It can also describe the ancient Greek-speaking world, which extended far beyond the borders of the country today. At other times, it points toward a wider cultural sphere connected by language, worship, trade, and custom. These meanings overlap, but they are not identical. The history ahead is not a single straight road from ancient Athens to the present. It is a landscape of many paths, crossed and recrossed by different peoples. Modern Greece lies at the southern end of the Balkan Peninsula, which extends downward from Central and Southeastern Europe. To the east is the Aegean Sea, scattered with islands. Beyond it lies Anatolia. To the west is the Ionian Sea, and farther south stretches the wider Mediterranean, the great inland sea that has connected the shores of Europe, Asia, and Africa for thousands of years. Wherever you travel in Greece, the sea is rarely far away. It shapes the light, the weather, and the ways in which people have moved. A harbor may be almost still in the morning, with small waves touching the stone. By afternoon, a breeze may lift across the water, carrying a vessel toward another island or a distant coast. One of the first things a traveler notices is how much of the land rises into mountains. Greece is a folded and uneven country, full of ridges, slopes, high plateaus, and hidden valleys. The Pindus Range runs through the mainland like a long spine, dividing the interior into distinct regions. Overland journeys once followed winding paths around these heights. Travel could be slow, particularly in winter, when rain settled over the lowlands and snow covered the higher ground. Yet the mountains were never simply barriers. Passes threaded between the peaks. Shepherds moved sheep and goats along familiar tracks. Traders, pilgrims, messengers, and armies found their way through the valleys. Mountainous geography encouraged strong local identities, but it did not make alliances, federations, kingdoms, or empires impossible. The land shaped human choices without determining them completely. In northern Greece rises Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in the country, reaching about 2,918 meters. Its upper slopes are often hidden in cloud, and winter brings deep snow. In later Greek mythology, Olympus became the home of the Olympian gods, a place where the divine world seemed to meet the sky. Long before those stories were written, however, it was already a powerful presence in the landscape, watching over plains, forests, and the distant sea. Then there are the islands. Greece includes thousands of islands and rocky islets, though the number changes according to how an island is defined. Roughly 200, or more, are inhabited. Some are large enough to hold mountains, farms, towns, and many harbors. Others are little more than a curve of stone, rising from the blue. Seen from a boat, they appear one after another through the sea haze, pale shapes on a bright horizon. For the people living among these islands and coasts, the sea was two things at once. It was a boundary separating one shore from another, but it was also a road. A journey that might require many hard days overland could sometimes be made more easily by boat, following the coast from one sheltered anchorage to the next. The Aegean divided communities, and it connected them. That double truth will return throughout this story. The climate follows its own varied rhythm. Summers are generally hot and dry, when low hills turn gold and the air hums with insects. Winters are milder and wetter, though northern districts and high mountains may receive substantial snow. Across long stretches of history, people cultivated grains, grapes, and olives, and kept sheep and goats. Yet crops and diets changed from one place and period to another. The landscape of antiquity was not identical to the one we see today. Coastlines shifted, forests expanded or receded, settlements moved, and cultivation altered the soil. Human beings have lived here far longer than any surviving written record can reach. This deep span is called prehistory, the time before written documents. In the Peloponnese, the broad southern peninsula of the mainland, Francti Cave preserves traces of repeated human use over many millennia. People gathered food, used stone tools, traveled, and exchanged materials long before towns or palaces appeared. By the 7th millennium before the Common Era, farming communities had taken root in parts of Greece. This was the Neolithic period, the later Stone Age associated here with cultivated plants, domesticated animals, permanent settlements, pottery, and polished stone tools. The change did not happen everywhere at once. It unfolded gradually, with regional variation and with knowledge moving through networks of contact. In these settlements, people planted crops, tended animals, shaped clay vessels, repaired houses, and passed skills from one generation to the next. They exchanged stone, shells, pottery, and other goods with neighboring communities. Their days followed the seasons: sowing, harvesting, gathering fuel, carrying water, preparing food, and watching the weather pass over the hills. From these quiet beginnings, some settlements slowly grew larger and more complex. Paths reached toward bays and river valleys. Small boats crossed narrow channels. The sea carried people, goods, customs, and ideas. And across the water, on a great island to the south, broad courtyards and painted walls would one day rise. Our journey now follows the sea road toward Crete. Chapter 2: Crete and the Minoan World. South of the mainland, where the Aegean opens toward the wider Mediterranean, lies a long island resting upon the water. This is Crete, the largest of the Greek islands. Its coast alternates between beaches, fertile plains, sheltered harbors, and steep cliffs. Inland, mountains rise above terraced hills, and some peaks hold snow long after the lowlands have warmed. During the Bronze Age, Crete supported complex communities linked to the wider eastern Mediterranean. The Bronze Age takes its name from the widespread use of bronze for tools and weapons, though stone, wood, clay, and other materials remained essential. On Crete, this was a world of farms, harbors, workshops, religious practices, storage systems, and painted architecture. Much about it is visible, yet much remains uncertain. We should begin with a gentle honesty about names. The people of Bronze Age Crete left buildings, pottery, seals, paintings, tools, and inscriptions, but no clear statement of what they called themselves collectively. The term Minoan was popularized by the archaeologist Arthur Evans, who excavated at Knossos in the early 20th century. He borrowed it from the legendary King Minos of later Greek mythology. When we use the word Minoan, then, we are using a modern label of convenience. It helps us speak about Bronze Age Crete, but it should not suggest that the island was necessarily one unified empire, or that its inhabitants understood themselves through the later stories of Minos. Across Crete, archaeologists have uncovered large complexes, usually called palaces. The best known is Knossos, but important centers also stood at Phaistos, Mallia, and Zakros. The first major palace complexes appeared around 1900 BCE. Several were damaged, altered, and rebuilt, before most of the principal palace centers declined around 1450 BCE. The word palace can be misleading if it makes us imagine only the residence of a king. These buildings served many purposes. They were centers of administration, storage, ritual, craft production, and public activity, as well as places where powerful people may have lived and worked. Imagine entering one in the clear light of morning. A broad central court lies open to the sky. Around it rise rooms on several levels, connected by staircases, corridors, and light wells. Sunlight reaches down through the building, touching plastered walls and stone thresholds. In cooler interior rooms, great clay jars stand in rows. These storage vessels could hold oil, grain, wine, or other goods moving through the complex. Elsewhere, craftspeople work with clay, stone, metal, wool, and pigments. Carefully constructed drains carry water and waste away. Doors open into smaller chambers, and steps turn toward upper floors. The architecture is complex, but it is not the literal labyrinth of later mythology. It is the result of building, rebuilding, and adapting, layer upon layer, over centuries. Adaptation and the practical needs of a busy community. The walls carried paintings on plaster, often called frescoes, though specialists distinguish between different methods of applying pigment to wet or dry surfaces. These images show processions, animals, flowers, marine life, and scenes involving bulls. Dolphins curve through blue fields, plants bend as though touched by a breeze. Octopuses spread their arms across pottery. Slender figures move through ceremonies whose meanings are no longer fully known. The prominent place of women in some images has sometimes encouraged speculation that Minoan Crete was a matriarchy. The art does not prove this, nor do scenes involving bulls confirm the details of later stories about a minotaur. The pictures are evidence of ritual, display, movement, and artistic choice, but they do not answer every question about political power or social organization. The sea was central to Cretan life. Sailors and merchants traveled in timber vessels, following coastlines and island chains. Exchange connected Crete with the Cyclades, mainland Greece, Anatolia, Cyprus, Egypt, and the Levant. Materials, objects, artistic styles, and ideas moved in many directions. Crete was not an isolated island kingdom. It was one important part of a broad maritime network. The people of Bronze Age Crete also wrote. One script is known as Cretan hieroglyphic. Another is called Linear A. Neither has been fully deciphered. We can see the careful signs pressed into clay or cut into other surfaces, but the language represented by Linear A has not been securely identified. The marks remain visible while their voices stayed just beyond our understanding. After about 1450 BCE, another script appeared at Knossos. This was Linear B, associated with administration influenced by the Mycenaean world of the mainland. Linear B records an early form of Greek, and its presence shows that the island's political and administrative life had changed. Another event has long drawn attention. On Thera, the island now known as Santorini, a powerful volcanic eruption occurred during the 2nd millennium BCE, probably in the 17th century BCE. It affected the surrounding region, but its precise date and its role in later changes on Crete are still debated. It did not by itself provide a simple explanation for the decline of the palace centers many years later. Island life continued, adapted, and took new forms. Buildings were reused, communities shifted, people still farmed terrace slopes, worked in workshops, and sailed from quiet harbors. As for King Minos, the labyrinth, Theseus, and the Minotaur, they belonged to mythology preserved by Greeks of later centuries. Archaeology does not establish that these stories describe literal events. They may carry distant memories, imaginative explanations, and the pleasure of storytelling, but history and myth remain distinct. From the harbors of Crete, ships continued northward across familiar waters. Ahead lay mainland valleys and hilltop citadels, where other palace societies were gathering goods, keeping records, and building walls from enormous stones. Chapter 3: The Mycenaean Age. Across the Aegean, on the mainland of Greece, a different network of palace societies took shape among plains, hills, and river valleys. This was the world now called Mycenaean, named after Mycenae, one of its most impressive centers in the northeastern Peloponnese. Mycenaean civilization flourished during the Late Bronze Age, especially between about 1600 and 1100 BCE. It did not form a securely documented single empire. Instead, the evidence points towards several palace kingdoms that shared important cultural features while remaining politically distinct. Among the principal centers were Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, Thebes, Orchomenos, and Athens. Each controlled the surrounding territory of farms, villages, roads, and smaller settlements. Their rulers and administrations collected goods, organized labor, supervised offerings, and maintained relationships with neighboring regions. They may sometimes have cooperated, and at other times competed, but no surviving record shows one king ruling them all. At Mycenae and Tiryns, the most striking remains are the fortified citadels. A citadel is the protected central or elevated part of a settlement. Here, walls were constructed from enormous, irregular stone blocks fitted closely together. Later Greeks looked upon these walls and imagined that only the Cyclopes, giants of mythology, could have lifted such stones. This is why the building style is still called Cyclopean masonry. The name belongs to later wonder, not to the builders themselves. Approaching Mycenae, a traveler passed through a stone gateway above the valley. Beyond it stood courts, storerooms, workshops, shrines, and administrative rooms. Oil lamps cast light over plastered walls. Doors opened toward spaces crowded with goods and activity. Outside, roads descended toward fields, villages, and distant harbors. The palace economy depended upon many people. Farmers cultivated grain and tended olives, vines, sheep, and goats. Craftspeople shaped pottery, worked bronze and precious metals, carved seals, and produced decorated objects. In workshops, wool was combed, spun, and woven on looms. Religious personnel prepared offerings. Sailors and traders connected the mainland to Crete, Cyprus, Anatolia, Egypt, the Levant, and Italy. At the center of this organization were scribes using a script known as Linear B. Its signs generally represented syllables rather than individual letters. Scribes pressed them into small tablets of damp clay, recording goods, land, workers, offerings, military arrangements, and obligations owed to the palace. For many years, modern scholars could not read these signs. The breakthrough came in the 1950s when Michael Ventris showed that Linear B represented an early form of Greek. His work depended upon the patient analysis of Alice Kober, who had identified important patterns in the script, and it was developed with the contributions of John Chadwick. The decipherment allowed the old records to speak again. Yet what they reveal is limited. Linear B tablets are mostly administrative documents. They list quantities of grain, oil, wool, animals, personnel, equipment, and offerings. They were working notes, not histories or poems, and they give only a partial view of society. Their survival is an accident. The clay tablets were not intended as permanent archives. Many would probably have been erased, softened, or discarded when no longer needed. They endured because fires destroyed palace buildings and baked the clay hard. A moment of loss preserved records that were otherwise temporary. Among the lines of inventory appear names recognizable from later Greek religion, including Zeus and Poseidon. This suggests continuity in certain divine names across many centuries. It does not mean that religious practices remained unchanged. Rituals, stories, and the meanings attached to the gods developed over time. Burials offer another kind of evidence. Some Mycenaean elites were laid to rest with valuable metalwork, seals, pottery, jewelry, and weapons. One famous gold funerary mask from Mycenae is conventionally called the Mask of Agamemnon. Yet it predates the traditional period later assigned to the Trojan War and cannot be connected securely to the epic king. That brings us gently toward Troy. The city remembered in Homeric poetry was not purely imaginary. At Hisarlik in northwestern Anatolia, archaeologists have uncovered a real settlement with many layers of occupation, destruction, and rebuilding. Some layers belong to the Bronze Age and show that the site was connected to wider regional networks. Archaeology, however, cannot prove that Homer's Iliad records one war exactly as it occurred. The Iliad and the Odyssey emerged from long oral traditions, and were written down centuries after the Mycenaean palace world had ended. Agamemnon, Achilles, and Odysseus belong to epic tradition rather than securely documented history. Perhaps old memories survived within the songs. Fortified cities, sea voyages, valuable armor, distant campaigns, and the unease of returning home. Yet those memories were reshaped by many generations of performers. Epic preserved the past through imagination, not through exact record-keeping. So the Mycenaean world reaches us in two very different forms. One is the small clay tablet, lined with signs and preserved by accident. The other is a long river of story, carried from voice to voice. Around 1200 BCE, the palace systems began to falter. The tablets stopped. Great centers were destroyed, abandoned, or transformed. But the people did not disappear, and neither did memory. Human life continued in smaller settlements beside hearths, fields, workshops, and sheltered coves. Chapter 4. After the Palaces. Around 1200 BCE, many palace centers across the eastern Mediterranean were destroyed, abandoned, or altered beyond recognition. The changes did not happen on a single day, and they did not unfold in exactly the same way everywhere. They formed a broad period of disruption and transformation. In the Greek mainland, The administrative system that had supported the Mycenaean palaces came to an end. Scribes no longer kept linear B accounts. Storerooms were no longer managed through the same centralized networks. Roads, workshops, farms, and communities continued, but the institutions that had once gathered their goods into palace centers faded away. Historians have considered many possible causes. Conflict may have affected some regions. Political authority may have broken down from within. Earthquakes could have damaged vulnerable buildings. Environmental stress, poor harvests, internal unrest, disrupted trade, and the movement of populations may all have played a part. No single explanation has been accepted for every place. The Eastern Mediterranean was an interconnected world. When trade routes weakened and political systems failed, pressures in one region could affect another. Yet each valley, island, and settlement also had its own experience. Later traditions spoke of groups such as the Dorians, and older histories sometimes described one clear Dorian invasion as the explanation for the collapse. The evidence does not securely establish such a simple, universal event. Population movement did occur, but its timing, scale, and identity remain debated. The most important thing to remember is that communities did not vanish. People continued farming, making pottery, working metal, worshipping, raising families, and building new settlements. A political system collapsed, but human life carried on. Imagine a smaller community gathered above a sheltered cove. Houses stand close together, protected from the wind. A path leads down toward boats pulled onto the shore. Another path runs inland through fields and grazing ground. The monumental palace is gone, but bread is still prepared, wool is still spun, and animals still need tending before nightfall. For many years, scholars called the centuries that followed the Greek Dark Age. The name reflected the scarcity of surviving written evidence. Yet darkness in the documents does not mean emptiness in culture. Many historians now prefer the term Early Iron Age, which describes a material change without suggesting that nothing important happened. Iron became increasingly common in tools and weapons, though bronze remained valuable and continued in use. This was not an instant replacement, nor did iron automatically bring social progress. Metalworking knowledge spread gradually through workshops and exchange networks. A smith's charcoal fire glowed in the evening, illuminating tools, hands, and the edge of a newly shaped object. Pottery provides another quiet record. Styles known today as proto-geometric and geometric show changing approaches to design. Circles, arcs, wavy lines, triangles, meanders, and bands were arranged carefully around vessels. These patterns reveal both local traditions and contact between communities. A clay vessel could travel farther than the potter who made it. It might be carried aboard a small ship, exchanged at a harbor, used in a household, and eventually placed in a grave. Its shape and decoration help archaeologists trace routes of movement that left no written account. Stories traveled as well. Around evening hearths, people repeated songs of voyages, old settlements, gods, heroes, and uncertain homecomings. Oral tradition depends upon memory and performance. A story remains recognizable, yet each singer may shape it for a new audience. The poems later associated with Homer grew from this long process. They contain inherited memories, but they also reflect the society of later centuries. The Iliad and the Odyssey are not direct documentary records of the Bronze Age. They are layered works formed through the meeting of remembrance, performance, and imagination. By the 8th century BCE, many regions were becoming more densely connected. Settlements expanded. Social hierarchies became more visible. Sanctuaries attracted visitors from wider areas. Overseas exchange increased. The quiet coves and inland paths opened again toward a busier world. Writing also returned, but not in the old syllabic form of linear B. Greek speakers adapted the Phoenician alphabet, a writing system used by communities of the Eastern Mediterranean. They modified it to represent Greek sounds and made particular use of letters for vowels. This alphabet was flexible and relatively economical. Letters began to appear on pottery, stone, and other surfaces. Some inscriptions recorded ownership or dedication. Others preserved names, brief messages, or lines of verse. Writing did not replace oral memory, but it created another way for words to travel through time. The return of writing was part of a wider expansion, not its single cause. Communities were already changing. Markets grew more active. Sanctuaries became meeting grounds. Political institutions developed in varied forms, from abandoned palace walls, Footpaths now led toward new gathering places. In the morning, people entered market squares, exchanged goods, heard news, and debated common concerns. Out of these shifting relationships emerged the polis, one of the central forms of ancient Greek political life. Chapter 5. The Rise of the City-States. Imagine a settlement waking beside a sheltered bay. The night has been cool, and a faint mist rests over the water. As the sun rises above the hills, a market square begins to stir. Baskets are placed beneath a shaded portico. A potter arranges vessels on a low wall. Travelers pause beside a fountain, filling jars and sharing news from farther along the coast. This scene, repeated in countless variations, belonged to a form of community that shaped Greek life for many centuries, the polis. The word polis is often translated as city, but that translation can be too narrow. A polis was a self-governing political community and the territory connected to it. It included citizens, institutions, sanctuaries, farmland, villages, and usually an urban center. Its boundaries reached beyond the walls of any town. The plural is polis. There were many hundreds of them, scattered across the mainland, the islands, the Aegean coast, and farther abroad. Some controlled broad and fertile territories. Others occupied a small island or a narrow coastal plain. The polis did not arise everywhere at the same moment, and it did not take one uniform form. From roughly the 8th century BCE, Greek communities developed many kinds of government. Some retained kings. Others were governed by aristocracies or oligarchies, in which power belonged to a relatively small group. In certain places, one individual took control outside the normal rules of hereditary succession. Such a ruler was called a tyrant. In archaic Greek history, the word tyrant did not always carry exactly the modern meaning. It described how power was obtained more than how it was used. Some tyrants were remembered as harsh. Others sponsored buildings, festivals, trade, or public works. Their rule could be popular with some groups and bitterly opposed by others. Some polis gradually widened political participation among male citizens. A few developed forms of democracy. Others combined several institutions or changed from one arrangement to another. Ancient Greece was not a single political experiment, but a field of many experiments unfolding at different speeds. Greek-speaking people shared important cultural connections. Related dialects allowed communication across regions, though pronunciation and vocabulary varied. Communities honored many of the same gods, visited some of the same sanctuaries, and repeated overlapping myths. This shared horizon is sometimes called Pan-Hellenic, meaning common to Greeks from many communities. Yet Pan-Hellenic identity existed beside intense local loyalty. People might recognize a common language and religious tradition while remaining deeply attached to their own polis. Shared festivals did not end rivalry. At the same time, the Greek-speaking world expanded around the Mediterranean and Black Sea. Between the 8th and 6th centuries BCE, settlers founded new communities in southern Italy and Sicily, along the coast of Anatolia, in North Africa, southern France, parts of Iberia, and around the Black Sea. Historians conventionally call this colonization, but the word should be used carefully. These settlements were not parts of one centrally governed colonial empire. A new community often retained religious and emotional ties with the place from which its founders had sailed, but it usually developed as an independent polis. Nor did settlers arrive in empty lands. They encountered communities already living there. Relationships could include trade, negotiation, intermarriage, cultural exchange, displacement, and violence. The outcome differed from one shore to another. New settlements became places where languages, foods, crafts, and customs met. Merchant vessels were sometimes drawn up onto a beach, their hulls resting above the waterline. Cargoes might include pottery, metal, timber, grain, oil, wine, or luxury goods. Exchange had long existed without coins, using gifts, barter, and weighed metal. In the late 7th century BCE, coinage began in Lydia and western Anatolia and was gradually adopted by Greek states. Coins did not replace older methods overnight, but they offered another way to measure and transfer value. Their stamp designs also carried public messages. A symbol associated with a city could travel far beyond its walls in the hands of merchants, sailors, soldiers, and travelers. Sanctuaries created another kind of network. At Olympia, visitors gathered for a festival honoring Zeus. Tradition dated the first Olympic Games to 776 BCE, though the festival's early development remains uncertain. At Delphi, communities dedicated gifts and sought guidance from Apollo. Votive offerings filled sacred spaces. A votive was an object dedicated to a deity, perhaps in gratitude or in fulfillment of a promise. It might be a small clay figure, a bronze object, a vessel, or an elaborate monument. Together, these gifts made sanctuaries into visible records of hope, rivalry, devotion, and memory. Poetry also changed. Epic songs remained important, but lyric poets wrote for different settings and occasions. Sappho and Alcaeus, both associated with the island of Lesbos, offer glimpses of affection, longing, ritual, politics, friendship, and social life. Their surviving work is fragmentary, yet the fragments preserve voices beyond the grand scale of heroic epic. Across the Greek world, letters were scratched onto pottery, laws were displayed, and news moved along roads and sea routes. Local identities remained strong, even as a wider sense of Greekness slowly took shape. Among the many poleis, two would later become especially famous: Athens and Sparta. They were not models for all Greece, and neither can be reduced to a simple image. Still, by looking at them closely, we can see how institutions, households, labor, and citizenship shaped daily life. Chapter 6: Athens, Sparta, and Everyday Life. Among the many political communities of the Greek world, Athens and Sparta have often been remembered as opposites. Athens is associated with ships, public debate, theater, and democracy. Sparta is associated with discipline, land power, and a demanding social order. These images contain elements of truth, but they can become misleading when made too sharp. Athens was not fully free, and Sparta was not merely a military camp. Neither represented all of Greece. Each was a complex society sustained by agriculture, household labor, craft, worship, and unequal systems of status. Athens occupied Attica, a broad region of hills, plains, olive groves, marble quarries, villages, and coastline. Its ports opened toward the Aegean. Over time, Athens became an important commercial and maritime power. Merchants carried pottery, oil, silver, and other goods outward, while imported grain and materials entered its harbors. Political change came gradually. In the early 6th century BCE, reforms associated with Solon addressed debt, legal standing, and political participation. The details survive mainly through later writers, so they cannot always be reconstructed with certainty. Still, Solon became part of Athenian memory as a lawgiver who tried to ease deep social tensions. Later in the century, Athens came under the rule of Pisistratus and his family. They were described as tyrants in the ancient sense, rulers who held power outside established hereditary arrangements. After the Pisistratid tyranny was overthrown, reforms associated with Cleisthenes, around 508 or 507 BCE, reorganized citizen groups and helped establish Athenian democracy. This democracy was direct rather than representative. Adult male citizens could attend the assembly, listen to speeches, and vote on public decisions themselves. Citizens also served in councils, courts, military units, and religious offices. Yet citizenship was highly restricted. Women, enslaved people, resident foreigners, and children were excluded from its central political rights. Not every male citizen attended regularly, and wealth, reputation, education, distance, and confidence affected who spoke and who influenced decisions. Athenian democracy was therefore both innovative and limited. It gave a substantial group of male citizens direct political power, while denying that power to most of the people living in Attica. Across the mountains and farther south lay Sparta. Sparta dominated Laconia and controlled neighboring Messenia and the Peloponnese. Its political system combined several institutions. It had 2 kings, a council of elders, a citizen assembly, and 5 officials called ephors, chosen each year. Full male Spartan citizens formed a relatively small elite. Their public identity emphasized military service, discipline, and membership in shared institutions. Their way of life depended on the labor of the Helots, an unfree population subjected to Spartan control. Helots worked agricultural land and lived under coercion, allowing the citizen elite to devote more time to military and political duties. Our evidence about Sparta is limited. Much of it comes from outsiders who wrote later and who could be admiring, critical, or fascinated by Spartan difference. The agoge, Sparta's system of education and social training for citizen males, existed and changed over time. Popular stories often presented as perfectly uniform and unchanging, which the evidence does not support. Spartan women could own and inherit property more extensively than women in Athens. This gave some women significant influence within elite households, especially as land accumulated through inheritance. It should not be mistaken for modern equality, and women's experiences still varied by wealth and status. Beyond these institutions, most people across the Greek world worked in agriculture, fishing, craft production, transport, trade, or household labor. The growing season mattered more to daily life than an assembly speech. Roads connected farms, wells, shrines, workshops, and town gates. Boats crossed narrow channels with passengers and cargo. Homes were generally less monumental than temples and civic buildings. Many were arranged around courtyards where work could take place in daylight. Bread cooled beside a wall. Wool was cleaned, combed, spun, and woven. Clay vessels held water, grain, oil, or wine. A small lamp filled with olive oil gave a gentle light after sunset. Diet varied according to region, season, and wealth. Grains and legumes were important. People also ate olives, vegetables, fruit, fish, dairy products, and meat on particular occasions. Wine was common in many settings and was normally mixed with water at formal drinking gatherings, though customs differed. Women's lives cannot be described by a single rule. Their experiences depended on legal status, wealth, location, family position, and whether they were free or enslaved. Athenian women did not all remain constantly indoors. They took part in religious festivals, family ceremonies, economic work, and social life beyond the household, though their formal political rights were severely restricted. Slavery existed throughout the Greek world in several forms. Enslaved people worked in homes, fields, workshops, mines, and estates. They came from varied backgrounds and experienced differing conditions, but all lacked fundamental freedom. Their labor was not a minor detail. It was central to many households and economies, including those of democratic Athens and militarized Sparta. The agora, or public gathering and market area, brought many parts of society together. Buyers and sellers bargained, craftspeople displayed goods, citizens discussed public affairs, foreign residents conducted business, enslaved workers carried out tasks under the authority of others. The same space could feel open to one person and deeply restricted to another. From the agora and the courtyard, attention often turned toward the sacred calendar. Processions crossed the streets, families prepared offerings, athletes trained for festivals, performers rehearsed songs and plays. Beyond local political differences, people gathered at sanctuaries and theaters to honor gods, hear stories, seek guidance, and ask how life ought to be lived. Chapter 7: Festivals, Stories, and Ideas. To understand the ancient Greek world, it helps to think not only of councils and markets, but also of the moments when a community gathered to look beyond ordinary routines. These were festivals, processions, sacrifices, performances, athletic contests, and consultations at sacred places. They belonged to the rhythm of the year as naturally as sowing, harvest, and the changing seasons. Greek religion was polytheistic, recognizing many gods and divine powers. There were the familiar Olympian deities, including Zeus, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Poseidon, Hera, Demeter, Dionysus, and others. There were also local gods, protective spirits, and heroes associated with particular families, cities, tombs, springs, hills, or landscapes. Religious life was not uniform. The same deity could have different titles and functions in different places. Athena might be honored as a guardian of a city, a patron of skilled work, or through another local aspect. Apollo could be connected with music, healing, prophecy, or civic protection. Worship adapted to the needs and memories of each community. Practice stood at the center of religion. People prayed, poured offerings of liquid, dedicated objects, joined processions, and took part in sacrifices and festivals. Ritual created a relationship between communities, individuals, heroes, and deities. Myth was woven through these practices, but it did not form a single fixed scripture. Poets, artists, cities, and families preserved different versions. One place might tell a story differently from another. Contradictions did not necessarily weaken a myth. They allowed it to serve many purposes: ritual, identity, memory, entertainment, and reflection on difficult choices. Myths were not merely early attempts to explain nature. They also explored kinship, justice, pride, hospitality, loss, transformation, and the uncertain boundary between human and divine. They gave painters images to place on pottery and dramatists stories to reshape before an audience. Some sanctuaries drew visitors from far beyond their local district. Delphi stood on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in central Greece. Laurel leaves moved in the mountain air, and a sacred way climbed among treasuries, monuments, and offerings dedicated by many communities. At Delphi, visitors sought guidance associated with Apollo. The priestess known as the Pythia delivered responses. Priests and consultants helped frame questions or interpret answers. Surviving stories sometimes present the oracle as speaking in deliberately obscure riddles, but these reports were shaped by later writers, and consultation could take different forms. People came with questions about journeys, political decisions, religious duties, family concerns, and the founding of settlements. They returned home carrying a response that still required human judgment. It gave uncertainty a sacred setting. At Olympia, athletic contests honored Zeus. The ancient Olympics were both religious and fiercely competitive. They were not an exact model of the modern games. The main events were restricted largely to free Greek men, and victory brought honor to the athlete and his community. Women nevertheless held important religious roles. Separate athletic traditions existed, including the Heraea, a festival associated with Hera in which young women competed in foot races. Across Greek religion, women served as priestesses, carried offerings, organized rituals, and participated in festivals essential to communal life. Imagine Olympia in the early morning cool. Athletes and spectators gather beneath a pale sky. Dust lies on the paths. Votive gifts stand in sacred spaces. Travelers who may have arrived from rival poleis share the same festival ground for a little while. Their rivalries are not erased, but they are placed within a larger ritual world. Theater also grew from civic and religious festivals, especially celebrations of Dionysus at Athens. An open-air theater curved into a hillside. The audience gathered on rising rows of seats, while the performance space lay below, open to the sky. A chorus entered with measured movement and song. Actors wore masks and performed poetry accompanied by music. Tragedies explored suffering, choice, conflict, and consequence. Comedies examined public figures and social habits through satire and invention. Satyr plays offered a different, often unruly tone. The surviving plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes form only a fraction of ancient drama. Many playwrights and performances are known only by title or not at all. What remains is a small window onto a much larger culture of public storytelling. Alongside ritual and performance, thinkers investigated nature, number, change, knowledge, ethics, and political life. The word philosophy means love of wisdom, but ancient philosophy was not separated neatly from mathematics, observation, medicine, rhetoric, or practical ways of living. Greek inquiry did not arise in isolation. Travelers, merchants, artisans, and scholars encountered the knowledge of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Phoenicia, Persia, and other cultures. Ideas moved with measurements, stories, maps, astronomical observations, and techniques of writing. It would be mistaken to say that Greeks invented reason. Many ancient societies developed systematic knowledge. What emerged in different Greek communities was one distinctive set of conversations within a much wider world of inquiry. Beneath a shaded colonnade, questions might pass slowly from one speaker to another. What is the world made of? How can change be understood? What makes a law just? What is the best kind of life? No final answer settled every question. The practice of asking became important in itself. These rituals, games, stories, and discussions continued, even as Greek communities faced pressures from the Persian Empire. Festivals still followed the calendar. Offerings were still placed at shrines. Plays were still rehearsed. Yet the 5th century BCE brought new alliances, displacement, rebuilding, and the rise of Athenian power. The story now turns toward that century, later called classical, though it was no more simple or perfect than any other human age. Chapter 8. The Classical Century. The term classical period is a modern label commonly applied to the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. It should not suggest that this age was inherently superior to all others. People living through it experienced uncertainty, work, argument, exclusion, illness, war, and loss, alongside creativity and civic achievement. The century opened beneath the influence of the Persian Empire. Persia had incorporated Greek-speaking cities along the Anatolian coast. These communities retained local customs while existing within a vast imperial system that connected many peoples, languages, and landscapes. In the early 5th century BCE, several Ionian cities revolted against Persian rule. Support arrived from some mainland Greeks, including Athens, but the Ionian revolt was eventually suppressed. Persian expeditions then crossed the Aegean toward mainland Greece. In 490 BCE, a Persian force landed near Marathon in Attica. An Athenian-led army defeated it. The event became central to Athenian memory, but it should not be turned into a simple struggle between Western freedom and Eastern despotism. Both sides were politically and culturally diverse, and Greek communities made different choices. Nor did the ancient battle directly create the modern marathon race. That event was devised for the first modern Olympic Games in 1896, inspired by a later legend about a messenger. In 480 BCE, the Persian king Xerxes led a much larger invasion. Forces traveled through northern Greece. A famous stand took place at Thermopylae. Athens was evacuated, and Persian troops burned buildings in the abandoned city. For the people leaving, the experience meant interrupted routines and uncertain return. Families carried what they could toward ships or safer ground. Temples, houses, and familiar streets were left behind. A naval battle near Salamis weakened the Persian position. In 479 BCE, Persian forces were defeated at Plataea, while fighting also occurred at Mycale on the Anatolian coast. These conflicts were not simply Greeks against Persians. Some Greek communities fought alongside Persia. Persian forces included peoples from many parts of the empire. Loyalties reflected local interests, political calculations, and the pressures of circumstance. After the invasions, Athens led an alliance now called the Delian League. It was named after Delos, the sacred island where the alliance treasury was first kept. Members provided ships, money, or other resources, initially to continue resistance against Persia. Over time, Athenian leadership became increasingly controlling. Communities that wished to leave could be compelled to remain. Tribute flowed toward Athens, and the League gradually took on the character of an Athenian empire. Athens used some of these resources to support naval power and ambitious building projects. The most famous rose upon the Acropolis, the elevated sacred hill at the center of the city. Between 447 and 432 BCE, the Parthenon was constructed primarily as a temple of Athena. Pericles was an influential political leader during this period, but he did not personally design or build the monuments. Architects, sculptors, craftspeople, laborers, administrators, citizens, foreigners, and enslaved people all contributed to the work. Imagine the Acropolis in morning light. Marble blocks wait beside ramps and tools. Dust hangs softly in the air. Craftspeople carve stone, shape wooden supports, prepare colors, and fit architectural elements into place. The marble was not uniformly plain white. Sculptures and details were painted in strong colors. Blue, red, and gold stood beneath the clear sky. Time has removed much of that color, leaving the pale surfaces familiar today. The Parthenon did not remain unchanged. In later centuries, it served different religious and practical purposes, including as a church and a mosque. It was damaged, altered, and eventually became the archaeological monument now seen by visitors. Like Greece itself, it accumulated many layers. Below the Acropolis, civic life continued. Adult male citizens gathered in the assembly, served on councils and juries, performed military service, joined festivals, and carried out religious duties. Public payments eventually enabled some citizens of more modest means to take part in courts, offices, and festivals. Athenian democracy was direct. Citizens voted on decisions themselves, rather than acting only through elected representatives. It created an unusually broad political role for those recognized as citizens. Yet most residents were excluded. Women, resident foreigners, enslaved people, and children had no place in the assembly. Even among citizens, participation and influence were unequal. Athenian cultural achievements depended partly upon tribute from allies, imperial power, enslaved labor, and the work of non-citizens. Drama, sculpture, architecture, and democratic institutions cannot be separated entirely from those unequal foundations. In workshops, pottery was shaped and painted. Metal workers produced tools and decorated objects. Sculptors carved stone. Painters created panels that rarely survived. Along the coast, oars rose and dipped in coordinated rhythm as ships moved toward the harbors. Athens became influential, but its power was neither simple nor universally welcomed. Democracy itself was debated, challenged, and interrupted. Other polis defended their own interests and feared the growing reach of the Athenian alliance. Above the city, the Parthenon appeared calm against the sky. Below it, speeches, negotiations, labor, and rivalry continued. The alliances that had once faced outward increasingly turned against one another, drawing the Greek world into a long and exhausting conflict. Chapter 9: Rivalry and Change. The Peloponnesian War is conventionally dated from 431 to 404 BCE. It involved alliances led by Athens and Sparta, but it was never only a struggle between two cities. Many communities participated according to their own interests, obligations, fears, and rivalries. The war unfolded in several phases. Periods of fighting were interrupted by an unstable peace. Agreements were made, tested, and broken. The conflict became a long pressure upon ordinary life, rather than one continuous campaign. Athens depended heavily on naval power. Its walls connected the city to the port of Piraeus, allowing supplies to arrive by sea. Sparta's traditional strength lay on land, supported by its allies in the Peloponnese. Because each side was strongest in a different sphere, neither could easily force a lasting conclusion. Armies crossed farmland. Fleets required timber, rowers, money, and maintenance. Allies supplied resources while pursuing concerns of their own. Fields might be left untended when danger approached. Families waited for news. Harbor masts stood against gray horizons. Assemblies listened to competing speakers, each offering a different plan and a different prediction. Early in the war, many people from the Attic countryside crowded within the walls of Athens. An epidemic spread through the city, causing severe loss. Its exact disease has never been identified with certainty. Ancient descriptions provide clues, but no single diagnosis is universally accepted. The epidemic altered households and political life. It deepened uncertainty in a city already carrying the strain of war. The historian Thucydides, who wrote an essential account of the conflict, described its effects. Yet he was not a neutral recording device. He shaped his narrative and composed speeches to express what he believed was appropriate to each situation. Years passed, and neither side secured lasting peace. In 415 BCE, Athens launched a major expedition to Sicily. The decision grew from ambition, strategic calculation, and political persuasion. The expedition ended disastrously in 413 BCE, weakening Athenian confidence and resources. Sparta eventually gained Persian financial support. Persian money helped it build naval strength and challenge Athens at sea. The old division between a Greek world and a Persian enemy no longer explained the political landscape. Alliances crossed earlier boundaries. Athens surrendered in 404 BCE, its empire dissolved, and its long walls were pulled down. Sparta briefly became the dominant power, but dominance did not bring stability. The 4th century BCE saw shifting alliances among Sparta, Thebes, Athens, and other states. Cities that had resisted Athenian influence later resisted Spartan power. Political life resembled a tide moving back and forth between uncertain shores. In 371 BCE, Thebes defeated Sparta at Leuctra. The result weakened Spartan dominance and changed the balance of power. Yet Theban influence also proved temporary. No single polis could hold the Greek world securely together. After years of conflict, cities returned again and again to ordinary routines. Markets reopened. Farmers repaired fields and walls. Ships returned to commercial routes. Public buildings were restored. Yet political fatigue remained, along with memories of loss and distrust. Amid this unsettled period, Athens became associated with philosophical conversations that would influence later centuries. One of the central figures was Socrates. Socrates left no writings, Knowledge of him comes chiefly from Plato, Xenophon, Aristophanes, and later traditions. Their portraits differ. Plato presents him as a persistent questioner. Xenophon offers another image. Aristophanes turned him into a comic figure on stage. Socrates asked what people meant by justice, courage, knowledge, virtue, and the good life. He often began with familiar words, then showed how difficult they were to define. His method could be illuminating, irritating, or unsettling. In 399 BCE, Socrates was tried in Athens on charges of impiety and corrupting the young. He was convicted and executed. His case belongs to the political and religious conditions of ancient Athens and should not be reduced to a simple modern story about free speech. Plato, one of those shaped by Socrates, founded a philosophical community called the Academy. His dialogues explore knowledge, politics, ethics, education, reality, and the character of a just life. They are literary and philosophical works, not word-for-word transcripts of Socratic conversations. Aristotle later studied in Plato's circle and founded the Lyceum. He examined logic, rhetoric, ethics, politics, biology, literature, and the natural world. He also served for a time as tutor to the young Alexander of Macedonia. These thinkers left influential bodies of work, but they remained people of their own age. Aristotle's writings include views on women, slavery, and hierarchy that should not be silently modernized or overlooked. In gardens, gymnasia, and shaded walkways, students talked while walking. Wax tablets and papyrus rolls carried notes and arguments. Questions moved from teacher to listener, then onward to another generation. Meanwhile, power was gathering north of the old city-state centers. Macedonia grew stronger under Philip II, who used military reorganization, diplomacy, and marriage alliances to expand his kingdom. In 338 BCE, Philip defeated an alliance including Athens and Thebes at Chaeronea. The poleis remained important, but they now existed beneath a larger Macedonian power. The political map was opening toward a wider world of kingdoms, roads, languages, and cities. Chapter 10. Alexander and the Hellenistic World. North of the central Greek city-states lay Macedonia, a kingdom of broad plains, wooded uplands, estates, towns, and royal centers. Its relationship to Greek identity was debated in antiquity and remains vulnerable to modern political oversimplification. Macedonian rulers participated in Greek religious traditions and used Greek language and culture. Yet the kingdom's monarchical institutions differed from the political structures of many southern poleis. Ancient observers could include Macedonians within the Greek world in some settings and treat them as outsiders in others. Identity was shaped by language, ancestry, politics, custom, and circumstance, rather than by one simple definition. Macedonia rose to dominance under Philip II. He reorganized the army, strengthened royal authority, used diplomacy and marriage alliances, and expanded his influence among neighboring regions. By the time of his victory at Chaeronea in 338 BCE, he stood at the center of Greek affairs. Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE. His son Alexander III became king while still a young man. Later generations would call him Alexander the Great. Alexander crossed into Asia and confronted the Persian Empire. He defeated the Persian king Darius III and gained control of a vast territory extending through Anatolia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Iran, Central Asia, and toward the Indus region. The campaigns unfolded over little more than a decade. Their speed can make them seem like a smooth line across a map, but they involved resistance, negotiation, destruction, forced movement, and hardship. Conquest did not create a peaceful or uniformly blended world. Alexander founded or renamed numerous settlements called Alexandria, though the exact number is debated, as is the degree of his personal involvement in each foundation. Some became major cities, others remained smaller military or administrative centers. In Egypt, Alexander was welcomed within existing traditions of kingship. Farther east, he adopted elements of Persian court practice and encouraged relationships between Macedonian and local elites. These policies created both cooperation and resentment among his followers. Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE at the age of 32. He left no uncontested adult heir able to hold the empire together. Almost immediately, his generals and companions competed for control. These successors are known as the Diadochi. Their rivalries divided the conquered territories into several kingdoms. The Ptolemaic dynasty ruled Egypt. The Seleucid realm stretched across large parts of Asia. The Antigonid kingdom eventually established itself in Macedonia. Historians call the era that followed Hellenistic. It is conventionally dated from Alexander's death in 323 BCE to the Roman absorption of Egypt in 31 or 30 BCE. During this period, Greek language and cultural forms spread through a vast region, but the process was neither complete nor one way. Greek-speaking settlers entered societies with older traditions of government, religion, literature, mathematics, astronomy, and urban life. Local communities adapted to the new kingdoms, while also reshaping them. A widely shared form of Greek known as koine became important in administration, trade, scholarship, and literature. Koine means common. It allowed people from different Greek-speaking regions to communicate more easily, though many other languages continued to be spoken and written. Imagine a market in a Hellenistic city. Caravans arrive from inland roads. Ships unload at a nearby harbor. Greek can be heard beside Egyptian, Aramaic, Persian, Hebrew, and other languages. Coins pass from hand to hand. Older temples stand beside newer streets and public buildings. Some cities were laid out with streets in a grid. They might contain theaters, gymnasia, markets, sanctuaries, royal buildings, workshops, and neighborhoods with varied populations. Greek-speaking settlers adapted to local food, clothing, worship, and political customs. Local peoples participated in Greek institutions in different ways and on unequal terms. The word Hellenization is sometimes used for the spread of Greek culture, but it should not suggest replacement. Exchange moved in many directions. Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, Jewish, Phoenician, and other traditions continued and influenced the Hellenistic world profoundly. Alexandria in Egypt became one of the great intellectual centers of the age. The city was associated with a scholarly institution called the Museum, dedicated to the Muses. It was not a museum in the modern sense of a public gallery. It was a community of research and learning. Beside it developed the famous Library of Alexandria, where papyrus rolls were gathered, copied, organized, and studied. The collection changed over time. Its decline was gradual and complex. No single dramatic fire is known to have destroyed all of its holdings at once. Scholars worked across many fields. Euclid organized geometrical knowledge into a systematic form. Eratosthenes studied geography and estimated the size of the earth. Aristarchus examined the heavens and proposed that the earth moved around the sun. Their work drew upon earlier learning from many regions. Greek scholarship did not replace Egyptian or Babylonian knowledge. It developed through translation, observation, debate, preservation, and exchange. In quiet rooms, papyrus rolls rested on shelves or in containers. Scribes copied texts by hand. Astronomers observed a calm night sky. Geographers compared travelers' reports. Mathematicians traced figures and tested proofs. Roads and sea routes connected distant cities. Letters, books, religious ideas, artistic styles, and practical techniques moved with soldiers, merchants, migrants, pilgrims, and scholars. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had become the dominant power across much of the Mediterranean. In 31 BCE, Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium, off the western coast of Greece. In the following year, Egypt came under Roman control. The Hellenistic kingdoms faded, but Koine Greek and the cultural networks of the eastern Mediterranean continued. A new empire governed the region, while Greek language and learning remained deeply rooted within it. Chapter 11. Roman and Byzantine Greece. Roman involvement in the Greek world grew during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE. At first, Rome entered a landscape of alliances, rival kingdoms, federations, and independent communities. Control developed unevenly, rather than arriving all at once. In 146 BCE, Roman forces destroyed Corinth and dissolved the Achaean League. Corinth had long been an important center of trade, and its destruction became a powerful symbol of Roman dominance in southern Greece. Yet local life did not simply cease. Greek communities retained varying institutions beneath Roman authority. Some continued to maintain councils, magistrates, festivals, and local laws. Political independence narrowed, but civic identity remained meaningful. In 27 BCE, Augustus organized much of southern Greece as the Roman province of Achaia. A province was an administrative territory within the empire. Northern regions followed somewhat different arrangements, and authority continued to change over time. Greek remained a dominant language in the Eastern Roman Empire. It was heard in markets, households, schools, theaters, courts, and religious gatherings. Latin had official importance, but it did not displace Greek across the Eastern Mediterranean. Rome did not simply copy Greece. Roman and Greek cultures influenced one another through centuries of movement and adaptation. Roman elites admired Greek literature, rhetoric, philosophy, architecture, and art. They studied with Greek teachers and collected or commissioned Greek-style works. Some art was purchased or copied, some was seized and carried away. Roman artists adapted Greek forms for new settings and purposes. Greek cities, in turn, lived within Roman legal, economic, architectural, and political systems. Athens retained its reputation as a center of learning. Corinth was rebuilt as a Roman colony and became important again. Thessalonica and Patras served as centers of trade and administration. Their fortunes changed as routes, rulers, and regional conditions changed. The Emperor Hadrian took a particular interest in Athens. He sponsored buildings and completed projects associated with both Roman power and Greek cultural prestige. Roman colonnades stood beside older sanctuaries, creating another layer in the city's landscape. Travelers rested beneath covered walkways, merchants crossed public squares, students discussed philosophy, pilgrims visited old sacred places. The Roman world absorbed Greek history while also transforming it. During the 1st century CE, the Apostle Paul visited Greek cities, including Thessalonica, Athens, and Corinth. Early Christian communities developed within a religiously diverse empire. They lived beside Jewish communities, traditional Greek and Roman worship, local cults, philosophical schools, and many household practices. Christianity gained legal favor under Constantine in the 4th century, and later became the empire's dominant state-supported religion. Older pagan practices declined unevenly. Temples might close, remain active for a time, be reused, or fall into disrepair. Religious change happened gradually, with differences from one region to another. In 330 CE, Constantine established an imperial capital at Constantinople, on the site of Byzantion, beside the strait between Europe and Asia. The city became the political and religious center of the Eastern Roman Empire. Modern historians call this medieval empire Byzantine, but its inhabitants generally called themselves Romans. Many spoke Greek, especially in later centuries, and their Roman identity coexisted with Greek language and Orthodox Christianity. The transition from ancient to medieval life was not clean or sudden. Towns contracted or expanded, trade routes shifted, invasions, disease, and settlement changes affected the Greek peninsula and islands. Some districts experienced severe disruption, while others recovered in different ways. From around the 9th century onward, towns, farming, monasteries, and regional trade expanded in many areas. Ships connected ports within the Aegean and beyond. Agricultural settlements supplied grain, oil, wine, animals, cloth, and other goods. Monasteries appeared in valleys, on islands, above cliffs, and in mountain regions. They became places of worship, landholding, learning, hospitality, and manuscript production. Their histories were as varied as the landscapes around them. Byzantine churches often combined domes with patterned brick and stone. Inside, mosaics and painted icons covered walls and curved surfaces. An icon was a sacred image used in Christian devotion. A mosaic formed an image from small pieces of stone, glass, or other material. Imagine entering such a church in evening light. Incense rises beneath the dome. Lamps flicker before painted images. Gold and deep blue surfaces catch the light, while quiet voices move through prayers shaped by generations of use. The division between the churches of Rome and Constantinople developed gradually. The year 1054 is often used as a symbolic date for the separation between Eastern and Western Christianity, but there was no single moment when every relationship ended. Political, cultural, and theological tensions unfolded over centuries. In 1204, crusaders from Western Europe captured Constantinople. Byzantine territory fragmented, and conflict between Eastern and Western Christians deepened. Different states and rulers controlled parts of the former empire. Constantinople was recovered in 1261, but the restored empire was much smaller and weaker. Other powers, including Venetian, Genoese, Serbian, Bulgarian, and Turkish states, competed across the region. Ottoman expansion into Greek-speaking territories began before the final fall of Constantinople. Some regions came under Ottoman rule while others remained Venetian or under different authorities. In 1453, Ottoman forces captured Constantinople. The event marked the end of the Byzantine imperial state, but it did not erase the people, language, churches, towns, or trade networks of the region. Greek conversation continued in an empire whose subjects carried many identities. Domed churches overlooked valleys. Ships entered old harbors under new flags. Once again, the political map changed while ordinary life adapted around farms, markets, sacred places, and sea routes. Chapter 12: Ottoman Centuries to Modern Greece. The Ottoman world did not arrive everywhere at once. Ottoman expansion into Greek-speaking regions began before the capture of Constantinople in 1453 and proceeded unevenly over many generations. The Peloponnese largely came under Ottoman rule in the 15th century. Some islands and coastal territories remained under Venetian or other rulers for much longer. Crete passed from Venetian to Ottoman control in the 17th century. The Ionian Islands followed a different path and did not share the same Ottoman history as most of mainland Greece. There was no single experience of these centuries. Conditions varied by period, location, religion, social status, and occupation. A mountain village, an island port, a fertile estate, and a busy commercial city could exist within very different local circumstances. The Ottoman Empire was multi-ethnic and multi-religious. Across Greek-speaking regions lived Orthodox Christians, Muslims, Jews, Vlachs, Albanians, Slavs, and others. Some communities were settled in one place for centuries. Others moved along trade routes, seasonal paths, or shifting political frontiers. Ottoman administration often organized communities partly through religious affiliation. The term millet system is frequently used, though these arrangements changed over time and were never perfectly uniform. Orthodox institutions preserved worship, education, records, and communal networks. Monasteries, churches, clergy, teachers, and local leaders helped communities maintain continuity. Yet it would be too simple to say that the Church alone preserved an unchanged modern Greek national identity across all these centuries. Identities were layered and continued to develop. Ports and islands participated in Mediterranean, Black Sea, and European trade. Greek-speaking merchants and sailors traveled widely. Ships carried grain, oil, wine, currants, cloth, timber, and other goods. Harbor lamps reflected on the water as crews arrived, with letters, news, and objects from distant shores. Jewish communities formed an essential part of this world. Thessaloniki became home to a major Sephardic Jewish population, descended largely from Jews expelled from Iberia in the late 15th century. For generations, Jewish religious, commercial, intellectual, and family life shaped the city. During the 18th and early 19th centuries, new ideas of nation and self-government gained strength among Greek-speaking populations. Several currents contributed. Enlightenment thought traveled through books and schools. Commercial wealth supported education and printing. Orthodox traditions, memories of Byzantium, and renewed interest in classical antiquity offered different ways of imagining a shared past. Nationalism proposed that a people understood as a nation should possess political unity or self-government. It did not appear fully formed, and not everyone understood Greek identity in the same way. Language, religion, local loyalty, social position, and political hope all played their part. The Greek War of Independence began in 1821. Revolts occurred in the Peloponnese, central Greece, the islands, and other regions, with differing outcomes. The revolution involved Greek forces, Ottoman armies, regional leaders, foreign volunteers, and rival political factions. The movement was not unified. Revolutionary leaders disagreed over authority and resources, and internal conflicts took place, even while the wider struggle continued. Civilians experienced disrupted farms, uncertain travel, displacement, and the repeated rebuilding of communities. Britain, France, and Russia eventually intervened. In 1827, their fleets defeated an Ottoman Egyptian fleet at Navarino. International negotiations followed. In 1830, Greece was recognized as an independent state. Its first borders included only part of the territory that forms Greece today. Independence created a new political beginning, but not immediate stability. Ioannis Kapodistrias served as the first governor. He attempted to build institutions for the young state, but was assassinated in 1831. Otto of Bavaria then became the first king of the new kingdom. Athens was chosen as the capital in 1834. At the time, It was a relatively small town, standing beside extensive ancient remains. Neoclassical buildings gradually rose near older neighborhoods, Byzantine churches, fields, and ruins. Political tensions continued. In 1843, pressure upon King Otto led to the granting of a constitution. The modern state was still finding its balance among monarchy, representative institutions, regional interests, foreign influence, and the needs of its population. Greece's borders expanded gradually. The Ionian Islands united with Greece in 1864. Most of Thessaly joined in 1881. Major territorial gains followed the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913. Crete's union with Greece was formally recognized after those wars. Western Thrace became part of Greece after the First World War, and the Dodecanese joined in 1947. The modern map emerged step by step. It should not be projected backward onto ancient, Byzantine, or Ottoman history. During the First World War, political disagreement over Greece's role became known as the National Schism. Competing leaders and loyalties divided the state and left tensions that continued into the following years. Greece then pursued a campaign in Anatolia. It ended in military defeat in 1922, followed by fires, flight, killings, and mass displacement. Greek and Turkish national narratives often describe these events differently, but civilians of several communities suffered. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 established a compulsory population exchange between Greece and Turkey, based mainly on religion, with specified exceptions. Roughly 1.2 million Orthodox Christians arrived in Greece from Turkey, while hundreds of thousands of Muslims left Greece. Exact numbers vary according to source and definition. Refugees arrived carrying tools, recipes, songs, skills, memories, and grief. Many faced severe hardship, crowded housing, unemployment, disease, or hostility. Over time, they transformed farming, industry, urban neighborhoods, music, cuisine, politics, and the social life of the country. New districts grew around Athens, Piraeus, Thessaloniki, and other cities. Music carried memories of Anatolian towns and ports. Foods and household traditions entered a shared culture, not by simple blending, but through lives rebuilt under difficult conditions. In 1940, Italy invaded Greece. German-led Axis forces occupied the country from 1941 to 1944. Occupation brought famine, repression, resistance, and destruction. It also brought the Holocaust to Greece. Most of the country's historic Jewish communities were destroyed. Thessaloniki, once home to one of Europe's most important Sephardic Jewish populations, lost the great majority of its Jewish residents to deportation and murder. This loss is central, not marginal, to the history of modern Greece. Divisions formed during occupation contributed to a civil war, conventionally dated from 1946 to 1949. The conflict was rooted both in domestic political struggles and in wider international tensions. Communities endured displacement, fear, imprisonment, and deep political division. Reconstruction followed slowly. Roads, homes, farms, schools, and public institutions were repaired or rebuilt. Many Greeks left for work elsewhere, joining older diaspora communities in Europe, the Americas, Australia, and beyond. From 1967 to 1974, a military dictatorship ruled Greece. It restricted political life, censored expression, and imprisoned opponents. The dictatorship collapsed after a crisis connected to its intervention in Cyprus and the Turkish invasion of the island in 1974. Cyprus is an independent state, not part of Greece. Its history includes Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot communities, along with other groups, and should not be folded into the territorial history of the Greek state. Parliamentary democracy was restored in 1974. This transition is called the Metapolitefsi. In the same year, a referendum abolished the monarchy. Democratic institutions were rebuilt and consolidated. Greece joined the European communities in 1981. It later became part of the European Union and adopted euro notes and coins in 2002. A debt crisis beginning around 2009 brought austerity, unemployment, protest, political change, and renewed emigration. Families adjusted to reduced incomes and uncertain work. Young people left for opportunities abroad, adding another chapter to the long history of movement. Contemporary Greece is a parliamentary republic. Its economy is strongly based in services, with major tourism and shipping sectors alongside agriculture and industry. Tourism is important, but it does not define the whole country. Greece is not merely an ancient landscape or a place visited in summer. It is a living society of cities, villages, islands, farms, factories, universities, ports, offices, and neighborhoods. It includes long-established minorities, immigrant communities, refugees, and a global Greek diaspora. Modern Greek has a very long documented history, but its pronunciation, vocabulary, and social setting have changed profoundly across the centuries. And now, as the long journey settles, imagine evening beside the sea. A ferry moves slowly across a channel, traveled in many forms for thousands of years. Its lamps make narrow paths of light upon the darkening water. Beyond it, an island becomes a blue-gray shape beneath the fading sky. On the shore, ancient masonry stands among apartment balconies, cafes, schools, churches, markets, and busy roads. A column may rest near a modern wall. A Byzantine church may stand a short walk from a Roman street or an Ottoman building. Older spaces have served as temples, churches, mosques, homes, workshops, quarries, archaeological sites, and national symbols. Children return home. A shopkeeper draws in a display. Cups rest on cafe tables. Bells sound somewhere in the distance. From a harbor, the low movement of engines carries across the water. The landscape has never been still. Coastlines have shifted. Forests have grown and receded. People have arrived, departed, returned, and made new homes. Sailors, settlers, merchants, pilgrims, armies, refugees, scholars, and migrants have crossed the same waters for different reasons. Greece is not one unchanging inheritance from antiquity, nor is it a modern place disconnected from everything that came before. It is a layered human history, shaped by local difference and distant exchange, by work and worship, conflict and negotiation, loss and renewal. The ancient world survives, but never untouched. It survives in words whose meanings have changed, in stories repeatedly retold, in stones reused for new purposes, and in questions still asked beneath different skies. The medieval world survives as well, in churches, music, names, images, and ways of remembering. Ottoman, Venetian, Jewish, Balkan, Mediterranean, European, and global histories remain present in cities, foods, neighborhoods, family stories, and routes of travel. No single golden age can contain this history. Athens was only one city. Antiquity was only one layer. The modern nation did not emerge unchanged from the distant past. Every period brought new arrangements and new understandings of belonging, yet certain rhythms return. Winter rain settles over an olive grove. Snow gathers on the high mountains. In summer, pine and herbs warm beneath the sun. Bells sound from grazing animals on a hillside. A boat enters a sheltered harbor. Water touches stone with the same measured patience. The ferry continues across the evening sea, following a route that is old without ever being quite the same. Behind it, the harbor lights remain. Ahead, another shore waits quietly through the haze. And the long history of Greece continues there, not as a finished monument, but as an ordinary, changing human life, still unfolding beside the water.